and to thank you for coming here tonight. So this is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's a writer. He's written a few books, and his newest book, We Were 8 Years in Power in American Tragedy, is out today, which is very exciting. So Ta-Nehisi and I have been working together for a long time now, like maybe 10 years, 11 years.
Longer than that.
12 years.
Yeah.
Longer than that, maybe.
Too long.
Too long. And this is the third book that we've...
in the audience?
This is the third book that we've worked on together. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the process and the differences in the process between the first, the second, and third books, and about what your expectations were. Today, as I just said, is the publication date for We Were 8 Years in Power, and it's been met with a lot of attention, as you know.
Yeah.
A lot of reviews, in the excerpt that ran in The Atlantic, there was a wave of responses that came from that one, which made me think back to your first book, The Beautiful Struggle.
No response.
So,
you could hear a pin drop.
You could hear a pin drop.
That book came out.
So The Beautiful Struggle came out in May 2008, which, also interestingly is at the beginning of this 8 years that you describe in the book. And in the new book, We Were 8 Years in Power, you talk about that as being a time of failure, fear of failure in your life. Can you just take us back to what were you thinking was going to happen in May of 2008 when your first book came out?
It's so funny because it was two things that were happening. I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but I was finishing the draft of A Beautiful Struggle. At the same time, I was finishing or writing the draft of that Bill Cosby story, which is the first essay in the book. And I don't know if I say that. I might not say that in the book. But I was doing both at the same time. And, they're broke. You're not really contributing anything beyond my beautiful smile to the household. And I just remember saying to Kenyatta, my wife, I just told her, baby, something got to change. This got to be. You know what I felt like? I felt like it was a huge opportunity to write a book. And I felt like writing the Bill Cosby story was a huge opportunity. And I, however awkward I feel about this moment, and I do, it's not out of any sort of modesty about my particular talent or work ethic. More than anything, I just feel like there are a lot of people who are talented. But I felt like I was one of those lot of people at that point. And I was like, come on, man. Come on. What do I have to do here? And I had finally gotten the kind of story that I wanted to write, at the kind of place I wanted to write it. And I had this book, and the book was, me. Like, it was, there was no filters with The Beautiful Struggle. I mean, obviously, you were the editor, but, writers are much more in control when they write books, and it's their name on the book. And so I just remember thinking, something got to break. You know what I mean? Like, something really, really has to break, and Kenyatta was like, it will. And what broke was not the bestseller list. That didn't happen at all. But for some reason, The Beautiful Struggle felt like a success to me then. And that's something like that I have to constantly remind myself of. We did our first event at the old Human Books that was up in Harlem. Yeah. Is there a bookstore in Harlem right now? There is. Revolution. Revolution is still there. That's right. Revolution Books.
Schomburg has a bookshop. Kind of.
Yeah, I think of them was. Yeah. But Revolution is still there. So I think 6 or 7 people showed up. I'm including my dad, my wife, my kid. Chris, I don't even know if you were there. Were you there? I actually don't think you were there.
I'm sure I was there.
No, I really think you weren't there.
All right.
Evan, who is here somewhere, took pictures, because Evan was there. Evan, I don't know where Evan is, but Evan took pictures, and he sent them to me recently. You're not in any of the pictures. So I don't know that you were there.
Fair enough.
See what I go through, man? Anyway, the point is, even though Chris wasn't there, I felt like it was a success, Even though he had more important things to do, I still felt like You know, because I had completed a book. I mean, and people struggle writing books all the time. So I thought it was a huge deal for me, even though, you know, it didn't, you know, sell anything. It was still huge. And so I don't know. I just had this vague expectation that my life should change, which is weird and immature, except that it did. Like, it was correct. You know what I mean? It was actually the correct expectation. I felt like if I could get the platform, if I could get the resources, if I could get the editing that I needed, that I could really, really do something big. I did think that at the time. I didn't know what big meant. I didn't picture this at all. Right. I just didn't have the capacity to think like that. But I thought I could. Big would have been making a living, which is what happened, you know, a few years after that. And that was big for me. You know, it's not a small thing to be a writer and be able to make a living writing at all.
Right. And so let's skip ahead from May of 2008 to July of 2015, before Between the World and Me, your last book came out. A lot had changed in those 7 years in terms of your reputation and your exposure. But what were you expecting would happen then when that book came out?
When Between the World and Me came out? Oh, man. Okay, so what you have to understand about like book writing or any sort of piece is you're always in your own head. So take like, even this book, let's just take something like we were 8 years in power. You know, I signed a contract. I think the crucial thing to know is whatever I have ever signed up for with Chris, much to his initial chagrin, but I would say ultimately to his great joy, does not reflect the book I turn in. You know, I mean, there's a whole story about Between the World and Me that probably shouldn't be repeated. But suffice that it was not what it was supposed to be. And so, like, once you get the idea of the book, and I had it, you know, for what Between the World and Me would be, I knew that was very appealing to me. I knew that was something I wanted to read. I knew it was something that I wanted to exist in the world. But would anyone else? It was not clear to me that they would. And again, that's not false modesty. The fact of the matter is, you know, good books, good ideas, or good books that the author thinks is good and his editor thinks is good. These books die all the time. They just die. I mean, that's the norm. I mean, but Beautiful Struggle had died. You know, it really had it at that point. And so, I don't know. I didn't, I think we had a meeting at one point after I turned in the draft, and you told me that Spiegel and Grau was behind the book big time. And so but I didn't know what that meant. Like, I didn't understand that. I didn't have you know, I know we had these conversations where I asked you about things, about like the business, because it's all actually really, really vague to me. It's clearer now. But at that point, I don't know. I felt like by the end it was a good book.
Did you feel like it was a book that would connect with people the way it did, though? Did you feel like it was a book that...
I knew that Toni Morrison blurb was big. I knew that. I was clear on that. I understood that was a big deal, but I didn't, you know what, this is gonna sound crazy. Even understanding that, I didn't understand how much weight Toni Morrison's word actually carried. Like, I knew it was big, but like, I guess like in my mind, I like imagine writers in terms of the field of artists, actors, you know, directors, you know, even visual artists. Like I imagine the world of writing to be really small, and it's not as small as I thought. You know, I was totally unprepared for what happened after Between the World and Me, completely. I mean, it's like, you know, getting hit with a Mack truck. A Mack truck filled with money, but it but it was still a truck. It still was a truck, you know what I mean? And, you know, your life can change in really good ways that you could not ever imagine, and that can still be a problem. And Between the World and Me was a problem. It was a huge problem. I don't regret it. I don't wish it didn't happen, but it definitely was a. I had no expectation.
Do you ever look back at the book now and read it?
Nope. No. I don't know the last time I actually read something out of Between the World and Me.
Huh. Interesting. So you talk about how your process.
You know, it's like over for me.
Right.
And it's weird. Like I think it's like this book. This is over. Like, it's yours now. It's not mine anymore. You know, I mean, I got another book that's due for Chris by the end of the year. That's like where, you know, that and other things. But that's where my head is. It's done. Right. You know what I mean? My part is done. I'm on the next.
Right. Okay, so you talked about how in your process the book shifts from its original conception to what it ends up being. What was this book supposed to be?
So we signed a contract, and the contract said, I think effectively, it was supposed to be some sort of selected collection of essays. So that could have been every long-form thing I wrote for The Atlantic from the moment I got there. And we talked about this. Like, technically, that's what the contract said, so I could have just put that there. I think it said 2 new pieces, but it was vague about what the new pieces were.
Right.
Like, I could have thrown it in there and say, it's my pleasure to present this book of new and selected. And then at the end wrote, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm gonna be really real about this. I'm gonna be incredibly real about this, because I'm real about it in the book. The contract I signed, the 2-book contract I signed was, again, beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And it weighed on me in a particular way. I've been a writer now for 21 years. When Between the World and Me came out, and that event changed things, as I said, I had been writing for 20 years. For most of that time, I couldn't have paid my rent by myself. So I have very clear memories of what it's like to be, at least in the terms of financing, what it's like to be, a failing writer. And I think that's a good thing. Because when I signed that contract, honestly, I felt like I owed you something, all of you. Do you understand? Like, I feel like I owed you guys. And it felt like merely to package a bunch of essays that, let's be real, you could get off of the web, into a book and then to slap a price, like that just didn't feel, and then to take my bag of money and go home. That didn't feel like enough. That didn't excite me. Like, when I thought about that, I couldn't even do the bullshit intro and conclusion I just outlined. It just didn't, like a good book, I think you have to feel like the author has to be conducting something, through it. Sometimes I like at home, like if I cook and I'm like in a bad mood and I'm not paying attention, like the food's bad. Because I'm not, do you know what I mean? I mean, maybe Eddie knows about this, but whatever's in me is coming through. You know what I mean? Like whatever's in me is coming through. And when I went back and looked through the essays and looked at all the blog posts, I felt like I could do better. Like I could actually make a book, a different book, a new book. Granted, a book, that's rooted in things that were already done, but it don't have to be just a sloppy best of. Writers do that all the time. It's so fucking lazy. I mean, it's just like, and maybe I'll get to a point in my career where there's like time for best of, but that's not now. You know what I mean? I'm not that old and distinguished yet. I hope to be, but it's not time. It's not time. It's still plenty of work, to be done. And given what happened in the election, I just felt charged to do something that I was excited about. And I hope that you're excited about it, but the first responsibility is for me to be excited about. And, it just didn't feel, we talked about this. Right. Like, it wasn't exciting. Like, when I thought about it, I got bored.
What is the thing that triggered your excitement, though? Like, because I know this is something that you go through with every book. There's, like, this kind of, like, roaming for, like, what is going to, like, set off the electric charge.
You know what happened? Nicole, who just did this panel, she sent me these boxes. She printed out all the blog posts I had ever done. In fact, everything I'd ever written for the Atlantic blog post, and she sent them to me. And I started reading through them in paper, and I could see, it was a moment when I had just gotten into the Civil War, and this was like about 2009. And I guess I was still high and excited about, the election of a black president. And I said something to the effect, I wrote something to the effect like, it's cool we got a black president, but, looking through, this history, and given the weight of the history, my great fear is that this is just a momentary respite, that this is just a break, that actually the norm is this thing over here, the actual history. I think about history as like a kind of planetary body exerting force. Like Jupiter is so big it actually affects the other planets in the solar system. And I think of history in that way, it bending and affecting the orbit of everything else. And I thought, damn, I was thinking that then? Like this was like I could see myself becoming, like I could actually see Between the World and Me coming together, like in those blog posts. And I could see, later pieces like The Case for Reparations, coming together, and then I thought, well, that might be something. Like, I actually might write about the process by which I got to all of these pieces and try to articulate something, about them. And then when I sat down to do it, I was like, okay, I think I got it.
Right.
I think I got it. And then, some of these essays are wholly different essays that are not even really, like one of these, I think the intro to the Civil War piece is all about hip hop.
Right.
Which seems weird, but it was the opportunity actually to write something totally different, about craft that, I just really, really wanted to do.
Right. So thinking about the actual pieces that you, so the way the book is constructed, there are 8 of the essays that you wrote for The Atlantic, and each one of them is introduced by a new essay that kind of situates where you were in your life and the sort of trajectory of Barack Obama's presidency and what was going on in the larger culture, and really about like this sort of awakening to this core idea that I think is at the center of the book, which is what you're describing about this sort of return of history in some ways, or the fact that history never left us in the first place. Do you feel like you learned something in the process of going back through those essays about these 8 years that you hadn't actually grasped as a whole before?
It was going through the process of doing that I got to that white president piece, yeah. Because one of the themes that slowly emerges over those 8 essays is the idea of, and the heavy gravity of the notion of race as a social construct, which is said so much by those of us on the left that people have kind of like, they think you mean this in some sort of let's all get along way. You're white, I'm black, that doesn't really mean anything. But that's not really what you're saying when you say race is a social construct. What you're saying is that somebody actually constructed it, that it was a done thing, that somebody somewhere decided to put down certain policies, that there's actually consequence attached to it. It doesn't mean let's all, go hold hands, and have a party. I mean, we can do that too, but that's not why that phrase is important. There's nothing, particularly soft about that phrase at all. And if you take that seriously, then you can then not just interrogate black people, you can interrogate white people and what that even means. And obviously some of that is in Between the World and Me. And so why not turn that lens on Trump? I won't respect the popular notion that he's white and everybody else is white. No, I don't. If it's a social construct, what is being constructed? And in doing that work, I came to this conclusion of he's the first white president. And that's not just a cute thing to say. Like, I can defend it in an actual argument. Because whiteness only has meaning within the realm of power. And it was only the presidency of Barack Obama that gave the possibility of any sort of power dynamic between a black president and a white president. You could have it, in such a way where black people are deployed, in the case of Sister Souljah, in the case of Willie Horton, Dusky Sally with Sally. I mean, you can have that sort of rhetoric, but Obama was something different. It was an entire suite of policies that had been racialized, that had been, subject to the social construct. That is fundamentally different. In addition to the fact that virtually his entire campaign was negative. And I don't mean negative like mean. I mean it was, I am not.
Right.
That was the seething heartbeat. That's why you start with birtherism, by the attack that, I am a citizen, this person is not. I'm a citizen, this person judging my case is a Mexican.
Right.
An entirely negative case, which is the core of what whiteness is. And so once I got to
what do you mean by that? Like, that whiteness is a negation of something?
Well, I mean, the popular notion, which has been propagated regrettably, even among, those of us on the left, holds that there is a black and white race. That's a real thing, that, if you have blonde hair and blue eyes or fair skin or whatever, phenotypical features you want to attribute it to, that has some sort of great meaning. In contrast to the idea that somewhere along the line in Western history, folks made a decision to attribute meaning to those features and to attribute meaning to the contrast. And so what I mean is in America, absent black people historically, and really absent a notion, I'm sorry, I have to, but I think this is appropriate, so I just forgive me, I don't mean to offend anybody, but I think this is actually really, really appropriate. Absent niggers, and absent the construct of the nigger, which is different than, how I think about myself as a black person, black culture, what I like, how I talk, but absent the image of niggers, whiteness doesn't exist throughout, in history. That's how it comes up. That's how, you see it in the law. It's always in reference to, some sort of inferiority, some sort of other. It's deeply tied, to the fact of living in a state like South Carolina, for instance, in the antebellum period, and the majority of the people around you are enslaved. And you're in a democracy, and you have to, ostensible democracy, and you have to come up with some sort of science or logic that gives you the right to dominate these people. And what you do is you create a mythology of the nigger. That's what you create. And that then becomes your identity. I'm more civilized. I'm more elevated. And I think that process, just haunts our politics, up until the day. I mean, even, one of the biggest areas of critique I had for Barack Obama was, this idea of respectability politics, which, to my mind, cannot exist unless you accept on some fundamental level black people don't work as hard as white people. There's no non-racist way to explain that idea. There's no way to talk about that doesn't get you back to white people and niggas. Right. That's what it automatically goes back, because you say, well, why would that be? Mm-hmm. What's actually going on? And unless you're going to talk about the history, what else do you have except that something's wrong with these people?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting looking back at your essays. One of the things that was interesting for me going through this process with you was trying to remember what I used to think of you when you were first starting at The Atlantic and first writing your blog.
What did you think of me?
Well,
be honest.
I'm going to be honest. I thought you were
I already signed the contract.
A really good writer who sometimes wrote about race but did not necessarily have a theory of race in American history.
Right.
And then when you get through the essays, so I think you had ideas about race, you cared about ideas about race, like in the first essays about respectability politics and Bill Cosby, in your first kind of encounters with the phenomenon of Barack and Michelle Obama. But it wasn't until we get to the case for reparations that we really see a theory of race develop. And so one of the questions I have is when I go back to your first book and I think about how you were raised in a family that was very much conscious, a family that was, had Black Panthers, and there was a kind of a revolutionary fervor in a house full of books about Black history and Black philosophy. And what is the difference between what you learned in that context about what it meant to be Black and ultimately where you've gone in your kind of exploration of what race is?
I hadn't spent any time studying white people at all. I mean, that was kind of the great advantage of growing up in my house. I spent a great deal of time, obviously, thinking about Black people, almost in an abstract sort of way, and understanding white people and racism. I'm sorry, thinking about Black people in a very direct way, actually, and thinking about white people as a kind of abstraction. And I don't know, man. It's it wasn't that people around me weren't saying this. For instance, we talk about this all the time. It was, you would hear people in your community say things like, this whole country's built on slavery. I would say, maybe. Because I was kind of, even I was a little skeptical.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then you go read these books with all these footnotes, and they say this country was built on slavery. Right. It's actually true, and they got data, and at that point, what you begin to understand is, I didn't understand Black people as central to white identity, and as central to, I could have rhetorically yelled out somewhere, this country was built on our backs. But I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
And I mean that in the most specific sort of way. I didn't know, is in the book, in 1860, 60% of all American exports were cotton. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that the greatest source of wealth in American history, before the Civil War, was the 4 million enslaved African Americans in the South. I didn't get that. I'll give you an example. I'm reading this great book by Ron Chernow on Ulysses Grant. It's exceptional. It's really good. And I was reading a couple nights ago, and I came across what I thought was arguably the most singularly bravest act ever committed by a president in their private life. Ulysses Grant, who is dirt poor, but as opposed to slavery, is gifted and enslaved African American, who he very quickly goes to the courthouse and sets free. And before I would have been like, well, that's a really kind act, but like enslaved black people were worth a lot. I mean, would you have to, and again, forgive my language here, but you have to imagine like if you somehow realized that it was morally wrong to own your house, and then you just walked away. And you were poor too, by the way. You were dirt poor. It wasn't like a luxury. And not only that, everybody around you, because he was in Missouri, slaveholding state, family married into slaveholders, everybody around you believed that owning houses was really, really important. That actually you were doing something immoral by giving up your house. And you just said, I can't live like this. I didn't understand it in that way. Do you see? Like I would have just said, oh, that was good.
Right.
But I wouldn't have gotten, wow, that was huge.
Right.
Like, that was gigantic, because I didn't understand the centrality of slavery, of Jim Crow, of black people in American history. I just didn't get it, and mostly because I didn't get white people. I didn't understand like what it meant.
That's interesting. So what was the triggering event for that for you? Like when did you first find yourself pursuing that line of exploration?
So I was actually working on a book that, the second book that I'm contracted for, just finally gonna get done. And that book has a lot of has a lot of Virginia in it, and I wanted to understand, for research actually, it's so funny how this happens. I wanted to understand what life was like. I wanted to read a good, sort of history of antebellum and colonial Virginia, and I was searching on, just through Amazon, and this book came up. It was called American Slavery, American Freedom by this historian, Edmund Morgan. And I tried to read it at first, and I was like, man, this is boring, and I put it down. But I was talking, on the blog, this is probably somewhere in there, I was talking about how I tried to read the book, and the cool thing about my blog is I would have like a lot of historians and, if not historians, doctoral students, and folks that were in the history, and grad students who would post. And I think I was talking about how I tried to read it, and they were all like, you really need to read that book. Like, you got to go back. Like, you really, really need to go back. And I went back, and the book blew my head off. I didn't know that, like, enslaved black people in this country and, indentured servants had, kind of lived around each other. This guy, like, you can see in Virginia, literally, whiteness forming. By which I mean you can see he'll say at this point in time, this law was passed. And then this law was passed. And you can slowly see in the historical record, like a notion of race as tied to power forming. I can't tell you how freeing that was. It was tremendous. In some ways it was depressing because you say, oh shit, this really is unnatural. Like we're under something that we did. But it was freeing because I realized, like, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, we made it this way. Like, it doesn't, like, there's no thing in my blood, even though this is what we think, that says I see somebody who is lighter than me, different color eyes than me, and so therefore I feel some type of way about that. And in fact, we know that there's no thing because there are people who we call black in this country who have different complected skin, have different eyes and different features, who in another society would not be black, on another time period would not be black, and I don't feel any sort of way about them. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Like, it's only the social, when you actually have a social construct that says this right here is black. But that don't apply in Brazil. That wouldn't apply in I think in Brazil they got like 40 different things you can check. Something crazy. That wouldn't apply in Louisiana, 200 years ago. That would have no meaning, on the coast of Africa 500 years ago. It has meaning now because of done things. And that was like the light bulb going off. Mm-hmm. Because then I could look at the history and look at what happened to black folks And I could see a case, right? Because there was laws. There were things that had actually been done. You know, it wasn't by accident. It wasn't like we met, didn't like each other. Oh, inevitably it was, you know, you just ended up in some chains.
Right.
You know, it's not what happened.
Right.
There were decisions made, and there was an entire architecture erected, you know, and not only that, you know, as I, you know, continued to read later, the wealth that was generated out of that architecture was ultimately indispensable. You couldn't have it in America without it. And once I got that, I said, you know, because I was against reparations, I said, oh. And then when I started, like when I could, you know, started doing the, you know, reading on housing discrimination, I saw you could literally trace the system well within to the living memory of African Americans. That you did not, of America itself, in fact, that you did not have to go back to 1860 to make the case. I thought, oh man, this is big.
Right. Now that's interesting too. Think about, because I remember when you first told me, I remember it very vividly when you first told me
you thought it was absurd, didn't you?
A piece about reparations. I was like, why is he doing that?
Yeah, you thought it was absurd.
I think it was also
everyone thought I was wrong. Do you know that?
Well,
everyone thought I was wrong.
Because I was like, so where's that book you were supposed to deliver? And you're like, Chris, writing a piece on reparations. And I was like, what?
No, do you know what? I have this memory. Like, I talk about, like, how crazy it was to go to the Aspen Ideas Festival for the first time in the book. And, you know, the Atlantic does this every year. And I have this memory of being there with another writer at the Atlantic and Rahm Emanuel's brother, Zeke Emanuel. It's two white people. I'm sitting here. And I'm trying to tell them, this is it. This is right. And they're like, Negro. Gosh, you got that. I was like, yo, this is the one. Right. This is it. This is what's missing. This is it. And I didn't feel like I had discovered it. In fact, what I felt like was, how is everyone why are people overlooking this? You know, why is this, you know, the property of people who were dismissed? I felt very strongly that was, I mean, I didn't know, again, you can't, you know, understand the effect, but I thought, you know, this is big.
Right. Well, the Atlantic must have believed in it because it was a cover story and they supported it in so many ways. And
they did, but you know, like when I talked to Scott, who's my editor on that piece, he says when he saw like the headline for the email, he was like, and then as he read through the pitch, he was like, yeah, you know. So I think the natural response is, come on, come on.
Right. Good. I'm glad it wasn't just me.
But you should have known.
I should.
You should have known.
You didn't know. Until,
right. I did know.
Until you knew. So going back to some of the pieces in the book, speaking of things we should have known. So you begin the book talking about, in fact, throughout the book, you talk a lot about failure and about how you didn't always achieve what you wanted to achieve in the book. And I remember when I first shared the book with people, the manuscript, once we kind of got it to a place where I could share it with people in-house at Random House, there were a couple of people who asked the question, like, why start with the Bill Cosby essay, which you describe as a moment of failure and shame.
Right.
So why?
To set the tone. This is not a book about...
Well, first of all, what do you think was the failure of that piece?
The failure was my unwillingness to thoroughly interrogate the accusations, which were out there at the time, of sexual assault. You hadn't got to 50 women, but it was like 8 at that time, and they were Jane Does. But I like being a reporter, I know what I could have done. It's very clear about it, because I thought about doing it at the time, and I actually had an interaction about doing it at the time. I know I could have got somebody on the record. I know I could have got something more, like it actually. And intuitively, I felt like it was relevant, which seems absurd now, you know, given the subject I say. But intuitively, I felt like it had, you know, huge relevance. And I was at that point, you know, so unproven, you know, to the magazine that I was, you know, trying to be with. And I thought, okay, this straight ahead story I can just tell. I don't have to throw in this extra wrinkle. You know, I can do this, I can execute this. I don't know that I can execute, you know, with this other piece, which in fact was a central piece. But I just couldn't see it, man. I had, and I'm just giving you context, right? This is not a plea or anything. But I had, you know, as I outlined in that essay, I had experienced so much. You know, I, you know, worked at Philly Weekly, got fired there, went to the Village Voice, got pushed out there, went to Time Magazine, got, you know, laid off, and I was like, man, I just need a win. I really need a win, you know. And so I was trying to write this essay, you know what I mean, that I thought could pass muster, and I was incredibly desperate. And what that is a lesson to me. You don't tell the story because it's easier. You understand? You don't tell the story because you feel like it's simpler or more direct, because inevitably, if that's your reasoning, it will ultimately be less true. And that's what really happened with that piece. It doesn't ring, anybody who reads it in the context of everything that's happened since then says, but wait.
Right.
But wait. And it's in the piece, which, if anything, makes it actually worse because it, broadcasts the fact that I was aware of it. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of like, 2 lines and then we keep going. In terms of starting a book with that, I mean, again, this is not a book in which I tell you how great I am. I think about that essay all the time. I think about it all the time. I think it probably will be with me, through the end of my career. And so it felt honest, you know what I mean? Because there's failure all through the book. There's grappling, all through the book. That's a kind of a thread, in the all through the new essays. And so I actually felt like it was, the perfect place to start.
And
also just like this moment of triumph that on reflection, you know what I mean, looks a little differently now.
Right. The essays that follow, you also feel like you hadn't quite hit your stride yet as a writer, and you're very open about that in the book as well. What do you think it took for you to finally, you kind of talk about like what you ultimately wanted your style to be, this kind of combination of personal narrative, a kind of historical investigation, sort of profile that feels real, and reporting that feels, rigorous.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to sound good.
And you wanted it to sound good,
yeah,
right?
I wanted it to sound good.
So what did it take to get you there?
Practice. Right, you just gotta get. The biggest thing about getting to the Atlantic was it was like, being a ball player and somebody giving you a gym. I just had a ton of practice, and I wrote a lot, over and over and over and over again, until I got there. It's tough because I think like for a lot of people who do what I do, not everyone, because there's some who I admire who don't. We like, everybody has a take today. Everybody's always writing these takes. It's actually causing me some conflict at the Atlantic. Because I'm like, I did a take today. I did a take on something today. Well, actually, you know what I mean? It's kind of... And at this point, I don't think that's what people come to me for. Yes, everybody understands you're smart. Now get on with your, you know what I mean? But what are you doing? What are you saying? What are you building? What are you creating? And it was not enough, and I knew this with the case for reparations, like it was not enough for people to read the case for reparations and say, oh, the logic lines up, he's correct. That piece had to haunt motherfuckers. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it had to haunt you. Like you had to read about Clyde Ross, and the rest of your day shouldn't be right.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like you should want to talk to, like, man, I need therapy. I got to talk to somebody about Clyde Ross. You know what I mean? Because he's in my dreams.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I never, like it should be bothersome. And that's different than being right. Do you know what I mean? Like I could have written an 800-word column for the Times and been right. You know what I mean? My logic the argument could have been correct. But if you're writing, at that length, you're trying to do something different. You're trying to get people to be disturbed, to be troubled. Like I'm troubled.
Right.
I walked in that dude's house, man. I'll never forget this. I don't think I put this in there. I walked into his house, and like I knew like that there were people, in Chicago, who had been victimized by redlining. And you talk to some of them, and some of them can work for your story, some can't. And I walked into his house, and I think Mr. Ross is the first person I saw when I went to Chicago. He said, I said, Mr. Ross, how long you been in Chicago? And he told me. I said, where you originally from? And he said, Clarksville, Mississippi. I said, oh, the home of the blues. He said, yeah. I said, what brought you to Chicago? And he said, I was seeking the protection of the law. And I said, what do you mean? There were no laws in Mississippi? He said, well, white prosecutor, white police, white everything. That's no law. And I said, got it. Like in my head, like I knew. You know what I mean? Then he went through, and spilled that out. And then, he talked about how he came to Chicago and he said, I left, no law. And then I came up here and I found no law in Chicago. And I said, God, I got it. Like that haunted me. Do you understand? Like when he said that, like at that moment, I to this day, I can't get that out of my head. And so now my job is to conduct that.
Excuse me. Sorry.
To you. You know what I'm saying? Like that's my job, to take that feeling that I got from him, and to give it to you. And you can't do that just by being right. You okay? You're messing up my story.
I know.
We were having a moment.
We were.
It's awkward.
Sorry, you should continue.
I'm done. That was the story. You missed it.
Sorry. Distracted by my sneeze. Yes. So let me ask you a question. What were your models for that kind of writing, though? What were the stories that when you were like coming up in journalism that you thought, well, these are the haunting stories. These are the kinds of things I want to write.
Well, the first thing is like hip hop, right? Like, you listen to like Nas and, you listen to One Love and that third verse, and it's like, I can't forget that. I can't forget that. I'm not even clear that I like, I write about this in the book, like him, saying, he's talking to the kid and he tells the kid, next time you shoot somebody, make sure you don't shoot no innocent people. I was like, wow. I mean, he says it more beautiful than that. But I was like, damn, that's some shit to tell a kid. But I couldn't get it out of my head. And then, obviously, moments in hip hop like that. And I thought, well, I want to write in such a way people feel like that. Like I can't get it out of my head. In terms of journalism, it's weird because I think of people who are doing nothing like what I'm doing. But Ian Frazier at the New Yorker, who writes totally differently than I do, but I think of him, like I oftentimes his stuff, really sticks with me in a particular way. God, I can't think of his name. Lawrence Wright, who wrote The Looming Tower. This is so bizarre, because I work for The Atlantic. So I'm about to shout out a bunch of, I'm sorry, Jeff, but I'm about to shout out a bunch of New Yorker people. They publish more than us. Lawrence Wright, I mean, like he's, his book, Looming Tower, like his rendition of Al-Qaeda, haunted me, it bothered me. Elizabeth Colbert, who I think is an absolute genius, when she writes about the environment, yeah, I know global warming's going on, but when I hear her write, I say, oh shit, God, this is bad. Right. And that's the kind of feeling. Catherine Schultz, that piece she wrote about the wave, how basically the Pacific Northwest is due to be destroyed. And it has so much depth, you know what I mean? That, like that's the kind of haunting literature that, I try to produce.
Well, it's interesting because none of those people write like you do, don't deploy like the first person voice. Mm-mm. And they also, I wouldn't say, are writers who are poetic in the same way, or rather who,
I think
the language is so
I think Colbert is, and I think Catherine Schultz is actually, I think those two are. Ian Parker also, who's funny and different, but also like I remember his lines. But yeah, I mean that's the other thing. Like I started off with poetry before I did any of this. I was listening to hip hop and being a very bad practitioner of it as a teenager. But that shapes you. That kind of shapes your aesthetics and what you think about things. I was telling somebody earlier today that like when I did My President Was Black, I just played Distant Lover over and over and over again. And I thought that's how people should feel, like when this is done. Huh. Like now that's obviously.
What is that feeling?
Oh man.
Okay, can we cue it up?
No, y'all should just go home and cut out the lights and listen to it. I mean, you can't. That's what's beautiful. Like you can't describe it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I were to tell you it's sad, it's mournful, but there's this. You know what it is? It's like listening, like, as I've thought a lot about Marvin Gaye, and it's his ability to deploy on multiple levels. You know, like he can do that, you know, sort of soul growl, and he can do this beautiful falsetto, and then he's got this sort of, you know, regular, you know, voice, and he can do all of that and maneuver it in such a way to make you feel a certain way. So when I'm writing, okay, at this moment I'm in the room because I want you to feel something. Now I'm not in the room. Now maybe like we need to drop back and do a little history. Do you understand what I'm saying? And maybe I'll let this one person talk for, you know, an extra long time because it'll make you feel, you know, a certain way. Or it makes me feel a certain way when I, you know, do it like that. And hopefully that can be, you know, conducted.
And when do you think you first did that? To your satisfaction?
I mean, I was always trying to. Probably Fear of a Black President. Yeah. Because that was the first time I wrote about Prince Jones, who's in Between the World and Me. I just kind of dropped it in there out of nowhere. And I thought, wow, this actually changes the color of the piece when you do this. You know, like people will feel, and if you put it in the right place, people will feel, you know, a certain way. I try to build to like a kind of a crescendo. You know, you should feel almost devastated, you know, in a good way, you know, as you get closer to the end.
So just going back to this idea of race as being kind of central to what you're writing, you say something really interesting in the book, which is that people started calling you a black, you're sort of the preeminent black writer, which I know you're very uncomfortable with. I won't even ask you about that, but that you also talk about wanting to be identified as a black writer. Like that is not something you ever wanted to turn away from. Do you think sometimes that because this analysis of race and racial history in this country hits you so powerfully that it has in any way made it harder to see other things? You know, people talk a lot about, like even with this last election, the role of class and gender in the election. And I know one of the big responses to your piece about Donald Trump that's in the book is that it doesn't see those things as clearly.
No, I think I made a decision to focus on certain things. I never argue that, certainly not in that piece, that race or racism is the sole way or the only way of understanding. You know, like one of the critiques when you're saying that this is the monocausal thing, what about sexism, what about, that's not the point. The point is not that it's monocausal, the point is that it's essential, which is a very, very different thing. The point is that it wouldn't have happened without this, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't have happened without other things too. For instance, were I, you know, rooted in a different way, oriented in a different way, had, you know, read a different, or I guess more volumes of a certain type of history, I might have written that essay totally different. It said Donald Trump was the first male president. Do you understand? Like that's an essay that somebody could do,
right?
But not me. Because I'm prepared in a certain way. You know what I mean? I've read certain things. When the case for reparations came out, I said, well, what about Native Americans? I would love to read that essay. Somebody should make the case for reparations for Native. I would love to, you know, read, but I can only do what I'm supposed to do. I think like what happens, and this is why I sort of detest all of these titles, you know, particularly the public intellectual thing, because what public intellectuals are often called up to do is to explain the world, and I don't really believe in that. You know, I can explain the world as seen through this lens, and I think it's important. I think, you know, the pathway or this way of seeing American history through the lens of race and racism is important, but it's not the only way to see the country. You know, I would never say that. My critics, on the other hand, you can't say that to them.
Right.
Because when they write about class, it's usually, yes, it was race, but, you know what I mean? It's all, you know, it's kind of this dismissal of race. And the fact that so many of them are white, I don't think that's incidental. You know, and as I make the case in the book, oftentimes the way they write about it and the way they describe it, it's very clear it's not incidental. So when Nick Kristof says, you know, for instance, you know, don't call these people in Oregon, you know, bigoted or racist, you know, because they voted for Trump, okay. But then the next line is, because that's where I'm from.
Right.
It's not a mistake.
Right.
You understand? Like, it's not a mistake. You know, he's not, and maybe he would, you know, if he were here, he would say, right, you're right, I'm not, you know, totally objective. Maybe that's not, you know, what he was saying. But I'm saying that has consequences. When, Bernie says, I'm ashamed that, when he, tells young Latinas I talk about in the piece, the problem with the Democratic Party is identity politics. We got to get rid of the identity politics. And a week earlier, you see him tweeting out, I come from the white working class, and I'm ashamed of the Democratic Party's inability to speak to them. Well, it's one or the other, brother.
Right.
Bernie, it's one or the other. You know what I mean? Either where you're from matters or it don't.
Right.
You can't have both. And so, what haunts this debate constantly is the idea that if I'm talking about being black, I'm somehow bringing something extra to it. But when you presume that the world is white, and right from that perspective, you somehow are doing something that's neutral. You're not, bringing in any sort of bias or anything like that. I would grant you that I make my arguments in a very directed and forceful way, but part of that is I do have to recognize the fact that I have a very large megaphone. I got that megaphone. I got that position on the shoulders of a lot of other black writers living in debt who schooled me. I got that position because of certain experiences that I had, in Baltimore that I bring to bear at Howard University. As you know, y'all messing up my moment, man. Yeah, that's right. You tell it. That's right. That's the point I was making. I'm saying I didn't come here. You know what I mean? I'd be damned if I came here to sort of shuffle and, play patty cake with these people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's an embarrassment to everybody else that didn't get that. I'll be in these. A kid asked me, they said, who are you writing for besides yourself? He said, who are you writing for? Because he knew I was going to say that. I said, let me tell you something. I'm writing for that kid in 1995, a long time ago, who's at Howard University and read the New Republic and picked up the New Republic and saw an excerpt of the Bell Curve, a book arguing for his intellectual inferiority.
Right.
And his only resource was to go and fume with all the other black students and black professors that had no real ability to make his protest heard out in the world. Now, granted, there was some protests in that issue from other Ivy League professors, which I don't want to get in that, but it's a different taint, a different sort of thing, because we were angry. We were pissed. Do you understand? And so I have a responsibility, I feel like, channel that, to bring that, that's what's missing. It's kind of chummy, respectful, sort of thing, that folks do, who have, now I'm going off, who have certain faculty positions with people or certain relationships with people. Listen, that ain't my world, man. I came from a black world. You understand what I'm saying? That's the tradition in which I am. And so being that there aren't too many people with this kind of audience, I just feel like I got to represent that to the fullest. You know what I mean? And be really direct and clear about that. And push these people, man, because they need to be pushed. Mm-hmm. They need to be uncomfortable, like we uncomfortable. Right. They need to, you got to make it hot. Because it's hot for us. You know what I'm saying? You got to make it hot for them.
Right. Right, absolutely. What we're going to do is maybe turn it to you guys, if you're not too hot. And we'll take some questions from the audience. We have some people with mics, so if you want to raise your hand. If you have a question, I see some hands raised.
For the microphone.
So can I just, Chris is too polite to say this.
Yes.
But I'm going to say it because I always say it when we give speeches. I love all of you who came, to support. I really do. But please ask a question. If you ask a question and if you do it in a timely manner, more people get to ask questions.
Okay, well, we have one over here.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you so very much. The idea of you being our Baldwin resonates very strongly. I wonder what your relationship is like with David Carr from the New York Times. And if you could speak about it from that perspective of his impression seems to have been that he found a underutilized mind in Baltimore and found a wish to give that oxygen to that voice. I would love to hear anything you had to say about Baldwin, anything you had to say about your relationship with David Carr.
Well, that rendition of David Carr is not too far from the truth. Not in Baltimore. I had left Baltimore by then. But I came to New York in 2001, summer of 2001. And those of you who have been in media for a while remember there was like this moment when people thought, well, when the magazine industry was really, really booming, and people thought this was the future, and when magazines like the industry standard, and everybody thought like something, it was a great time for writers. And I came to New York seeking that. And the end had already begun before I got here, even though I didn't realize it. But then 9/11 happened, and bottom fell out of all of that. And I found myself here with a one-year-old child, a wife making, I think I was making $28,000, something like that, in a basement Brooklyn apartment. And me, again, as I said, not really able to, contribute much. And David was a big shot by then. He was first writing for The Atlantic and then New York Magazine and then for The Times. And, he was my editor at Washington City paper, and we had a good relationship. But I didn't call him too much. I think I was kind of ashamed. You know what I mean? I felt like I was failing. But he would call me up, and he would take me to these fancy restaurants in Manhattan, or what I thought was fancy at the time. I guess it is fancy. He'd take me to these fancy restaurants. One time I came into Manhattan with shorts on. He was like, we can't go. We ended up at Virgil's, which was great. I was like, wow, Virgil's. This is a treat. I mean, it was huge. It was huge. You know what I'm saying? And he would call me. And some days I would come home and I would tell Kenya, I'd say, I don't know, what is this white dude doing, man? Why is he wasting his time with me? And I advanced, got a couple jobs and got laid off. And right before The Atlantic, I just felt like I had, after I got laid off from Time, I felt like I had failed everything. I thought I failed everybody. I thought I failed my parents, failed Kenyatta, failed my son, failed David, who had put all of this energy into me. And like he'd done every time something went bad somewhere, he said, it's not you. I'm just gonna tell you. And David was such a mean, kick-ass editor. I mean, he was loud, would yell, blustery, and he said, it's them, not you. And I would look out and I would say, how could it be them, not me? And he said, it is. He got to see, some of this, but he died before Between the World and Me came out. I mean, which is just heartbreaking. I mean, just completely, that's his book. That's his book. He poured so much into me when no one outside of my family, and Chris a little bit, no one believed. I mean, it really, and my agent, Gloria Loomis, too. I can't forget you, Gloria. Of course, Gloria. But just a minority of people believed. Let's say that. Let's not say no one. But a minority of people. And he just, poured over and over and over again. I remember, after Beautiful Struggle came out, we did an event together. And we were at dinner. And in typical David fashion, we had a toast. He wasn't, he toasted water. And he said, here's to you, T. All those who tried to kill you are dead. I said, damn right. That was my man. I loved him. Adored him.
Do we have another question?
Ta-Nehisi, excellent speech. Really, you were at CUNY J School for a year, and so we've heard about other influences, but I just wanted to know what influence being at a journalism school for a year had on either what you've written since then or what you're thinking about writing in the future.
I think I didn't give them my best. That was a crazy year. That was the year I was actually writing Between the World and Me. And so while CUNY J School was extremely hospitable to me, I tried to give the kids what I had. Well, you talk about failure. That honestly was another, one of those years where I feel like I didn't give as much as I could have. It's difficult, man. You're pulled in 5 different directions. But when you have kids who look up to you, they should be your priority. And I don't know that I quite executed there in the way I should have.
Hi, I wanted to ask Chris a question. Everyone's been asking your authors questions, and you've done something in publishing, which don't think anyone else has done. And the questions that have been asked your authors, like how have you found your safe space in the world of publishing? Where have you found your inspirations from in the list that you've built and the authors that you've inspired and worked with so deeply?
You could have asked me a question.
Well, I'll quickly answer that. Thank you for the question. I have a pretty safe space generally because I am editing, not writing. There's a whole story I could tell about the kind of challenges within the industry. But the thing that makes me happy to get up in the morning and go to work is the fact that I hear from Ta-Nehisi really 5 times a day, and it's. And Eddie and Jenna and Kiara and Kimberly, all these people are what gives me energy and hope and excitement. I mean, can you imagine being able to talk to these people all the time? This is what I do all the time. And it's an absolute joy sometimes with Ta-Nehisi. It gets a little funny, but mostly it's a joy. And thank you for that question.
Hi, yeah.
One more, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hi. I saw an interview with you where you said that the quote, "the arc of history is long and bends towards justice," that you don't tend to care for that phrasing. Can you talk a little bit about that, and particularly in the post-Obama presidency with Trump, what does justice look like under? What do you think, I'm curious, what do you think white America wants out of this president that voted for him? And what do you think they'll get?
Let's go with the last one. What do you think?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. Because I think one of the reasons why I thought Trump couldn't happen was out of a kind of self-preservation. Listen, I may feel however I feel, about black people, about brown people, about yellow people, about women, of all colors, whatever, about the LGBT community. But this is not the dude I want with his hand on the button, not him. He's just not the one. And I thought that was an understood sense. I mean, this is, all you can do is laugh because it's that scary, right? It's that scary. I mean, you got a guy conducting diplomacy with a nuclear rogue state over Twitter. That's what's happening. Secretary of State says one thing, next day dude comes out and contradicts it. You understand? This is, that's just North Korea. I'm only talking about North Korea right now. This is dangerous. This is really, really scary territory. But the fact of the matter, when I think about it, I hate saying things like this. I hate saying things like this. When I reflected on it though, because as I argue in the last essay, it's quite clear that the construct of whiteness, that the idea of identifying with whiteness was what brought us here. It's in the socioeconomic data. It's the clearest through line. It is not, you can look at working class people from all different communities. That's not the through line. Working class white people voted for Trump, not working class black people, brown people, Asian people, rich people, poor people, women, college educated, not college educated. He won majorities of all of them. All of them. Every single sector. You got to start getting into the fine, really dicing it up before you can find a majority that didn't go to Trump. At one point recently, just before the essay was published, 3 months ago, you're talking to you're looking at every demographic group. The only group of people he had a positive approval rate with was, folks who identified as white. And you know that nobody black could ever get away with this. I mean, Trump was in Puerto Rico hurling, what did he say? He said hurling paper towels at people. Do you imagine Obama doing this? You gotta imagine Obama like going to Florida in a community of white people that's been devastated and hurling paper towels at them. Like that's what you have to get. You gotta imagine a black man being caught on tape bragging about sexual assault of a white woman. That dude can't be governor, much less president. And you connect the fact of those privileges that come through the construct of whiteness, right? Like the idea that you can be mediocre and be president, right? You just be completely mediocre and be president. And the fact that that endangers the world. That actually, and I thought like that connection would be made, but it wasn't. And the horrible thing is when you think about it, what you see is like a death wish almost. The fact of it is it ain't the first time. 1860, they tried to destroy the country for the right to hold slaves and to expand that right. In fact, that was the plan. The plan was to expand it into South America and into the Caribbean. An act of national suicide, because that's what it actually was. For the right to hold people like in bondage. That's incredible to think about. Abraham Lincoln didn't come in and say, hey, I'm gonna, abolish it. That wasn't the platform. The platform was, I ain't gonna let you expand. That was enough for an act of suicide. That is scary. Because what it says is this moment actually has precedent. And a better historian than me could probably find other precedent besides that, of a kind of suicidal wish, within the construct of power. I don't know what these folks want. I don't know. To be heard? We hear you. We hear you now. And we all, stand on the precipice about to die with you.
So it's also interesting as she talked about this question of the arc of history bending toward justice. And I know you have a line in Between the World and Me where you said it bends toward the grave, right? Where it's like, this is what we all have waiting for us. And so there's a sense of like that a lot of people have had from your work, that there's something bleak about it. But we've talked a lot about what I think is the most sort of, to me, I never get a sense of feeling bleak or depressed when I read your work. I feel a kind of invigoration. Mm-hmm. And you write in the book, I think, really beautifully about kind of what your purpose is as a writer and what drives you.
Yeah. This is the thing you queued me up for, right?
I'm queuing you up.
We got a whole act here. He prepped me. He don't want y'all to know that he prepped me. I actually forgot what it was, actually.
I didn't prep him, but go ahead.
So I talked about like that moment with Clyde Ross, right, and how haunting it was. But at the same time, as haunting as it was actually deeply gratifying also. Because at that moment, I understood. Like, he drew out the line. And you got to understand, like, when you're black and you're coming up, and these things are happening to you, you have, like, deep suspicions about why they're happening. But you don't have, as they say, the receipts. You don't really know. You think you got ripped off, but you ain't got the receipts. You know what I'm saying? You can't prove, you know what I'm saying? I got ripped off.
Right.
And Clyde Ross gave me the receipts. The work gives you the receipts. You can do the math, and then you can argue with people about it, and they crazy. Half the time, Chris, a lot of these people say, Chris, I'd be wanting to answer and go fight with people. He'd be like, you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't, because you know now. Now you got the receipts right now. Now, if they don't recognize the receipts, that's on them, but you can't keep going like this. Over there, the receipt is right there for anybody that wants to see it. They're all there for anybody that want to see them. That is empowering. I can't control the ultimate, faith, the ultimate fate of my life in any sort of grand sense. Who knows what's going to happen? I walk out in the street. Who knows? Might get hit by a car. I don't know. I can't, there's no power within me to undo, some 400 years of history. I don't have that ability, but I don't have to walk around only with the mere suspicion that I got ripped off. I can have the receipts. You understand? Mm-hmm. I can know. And even if you act like you don't know, I know you know. And that, relieves a lot of stress. Because, you don't end up playing games with people.
Right.
Yelling at people, getting upset. No, I got it. I know. We got the receipts. Whenever you want to look at them, I'm right here. Yeah.
Right, all right. Well, thank you very much, Ta-Nehisi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for coming out tonight.